and Corporate Services and Scrutiny Management Committee, and apologies for the slightly late start, but I think we have got everybody here in the meeting, either physically or virtually, that we need to have here. So I'll just run us through the agenda very briefly. It is just a single principal item today. So first of all, I just need to note a number of apologies and substitutions. So we have received apologies from Councillor Hollier, Councillor Musson, Councillor Norman, Councillor Pearson and Councillor Rowley. And we have Councillor Kilbane substituting for Councillor Norman, Councillor Looker substituting for Councillor Musson, Councillor Hook substituting for Councillor Pearson, and Councillor Orrell substituting for Councillor Hollier. We are missing two members of the committee, but we are quorate, so we're fine to be continuing. Around the table, we have a number of officers and stakeholders, and my intention is to introduce people as they first come in to speak, rather than go around everybody now, because I think, frankly, we won't all remember exactly who everybody is. So if I just move us on to the main items of business, then agenda item 1 of declarations of interest. Has anybody got anything they wish to declare in relation to today's agenda? Nope. Agenda item 2 is public participation, but we haven't had anybody register to speak, so I can move us on to agenda item 3, which is the main item of business today, which is a report on the university car parking update. Just to set a little bit of context before we get into that, this meeting was come about as a result of a couple of call-ins that the committee has heard. One of the recommendations from that call-in was that we would look into the issue of car parking around the university in relation to 106 agreements, the university travel plan, various aspects of the outline planning that was originally made, I think, back in 2007. So we do have Gareth Arnold and Sandra Brannigan on hand if there are any technical questions. Gareth is the development manager and Sandra is senior solicitor from planning, but I'm not expecting them to speak unless it's to clarify a technical point. And so what I want to do is just to be clear, we're not revisiting decisions, we're not treating this as a call-in. It is just about trying to understand the situation from everybody's perspective and where we are. If as a committee we feel that there's something that we think we want to make a recommendation on or make a request about, we can do so. We'll be able to do so at the end of the meeting, but it will just be that recommendation or request for further action. We can't make a decision today that says from this moment forth this shall happen or that shall happen. So I just wanted to be clear on that. And the other point I wanted just to be clear on as well is that if we are entering discussion or debate, I would want to make sure that all questions and discussion come through me as chair. So if you can just indicate in the normal way, that'd be great. So without further ado, I will hand over to Neil Ferris as the Corporate Director of Place, just to give a brief overview of the report that you prepared for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Crawshaw. Clearly, I won't go through the report in detail, but just for context, the university is a really important part of the city's economy. They're a major employer, and along with their students, they contribute to the city's social and economic well-being. But clearly, the University of York has expanded significantly in recent years, and that has transport implications for the city. But those transport implications should be considered in the context of our own local transport plan, which puts walking and cycling and public transport ahead of vehicles. Our own local plan, again, does similarly looks at the distribution of development to ensure that we have sustainable development in the city. The specific decision that was taken in respect of the location and the planning permission given to the university, PPG 13, in terms of the sustainability of the location and its transport impacts. And then clearly the piece that sits behind all of that is the council's own climate change resolution, which effectively recognises the impact that transport has on the city. So we've got a major employer, we've got a policy context, and then we've got impacts of people's behaviours within those two constraints. I'd like to highlight that the university has consistently complied with its planning obligations and providing transport plans, and works very much in tandem and in the same hierarchical way that the council does in terms of trying to promote sustainable transport. The report and the consequences for the residents of York manifest themselves on the streets of our residential areas associated with or adjacent to the university. And as that impact manifests itself on those streets, the council responds with the tools at its disposal. Clearly, there are such things as yellow lines, which we effectively prohibit parking in its totality. But the one I think that has caused the most interest and is certainly the subject to discussion today is the residents' parking regime, for which the university, as part of its sustainable commitment to transport, effectively picks up the bills for those neighbouring streets for 15 years from the initial occupancy, and that 15 years expires in, I think, about 18 months' time. So effectively, the responsibility for payment then falls upon residents, and clearly the context of that regime in terms of residents parking, the charges and the level of charges and where it applies to is a matter for the City Council to control. That's the context.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful, Neil. So we've got two representatives from the University of York with us today. So we have Harvey Dowdy, who's the Director of Technology, Estates and Facilities, and Richard Walker, who's Head of Programme Design and Learning Technology. So I just wondered if you had anything that you wanted to initially add to Neil's comments to begin with.
Thank you very much, Chair. I should say that we, as a university, have a sustainable travel plan. I think that's referenced in the documentation. And insofar as possible, that's consistent with all the policies and protocols of City of York Council. So we try to harmonise wherever we can. We do charge for parking as part of that policy, with a very small number of exceptions. I would like to let you know that we currently have a 20% float in car park spaces. We're working through why that should be at the moment, but I think it's good news that those spaces exist. And we have proactively, since the last surveys were undertaken in July, had a campaign over social media, print media, any way we can with our residents, and that's our student residents and our staff, to make sure that they understand the importance of our good neighbour processes and our good neighbour regime. And we work very hard to make sure that there is no antisocial behaviour, which includes parking. Since the start of this term, there has been no obvious congestion in the places that were previously highlighted. And to that extent, we hope that the campaign that we've proactively managed has worked, but we are always happy to continue or to have fresh dialogue with City of York at any time. We are here to be the good neighbour.
Thank you very much. We've got on the line Councillor Waters, who is one of the ward councillors representing an area that's impacted by the university in various different ways. And he was one of the signatories to the call-in on both occasions. So what I just would like to invite Councillor Waters to do is just give us a brief overview from the ward councillor perspective of where he sees the issues being. Now, my intention had been originally that we would then, as a committee, be able to ask questions of each different group sort of in turn. But because Councillor Waters is limited in the time that he has, I think what I'll do is invite him just to give us an overview. And then if there's any points of clarity within anything that he's said that committee members wish to double check with him before he has to leave, if you could just have them in mind, and then we'll ask him any questions before then going back to officers and the university with any points that we may want to discuss. So Councillor Waters, are you there? Can you hear us okay? If I could just ask you to press *6 on your handset, that should unmute you. Councillor Waters, I think you're unmuted now.
Right.
Yeah,
thank you, Chair.
We've got you.
Just in comment to what I've just heard, well, first of all, my recollection of the calling meeting was that ward councillors were supposed to be involved in any discussions or initiatives that highways officers were going to undertake with the university. Well, we've heard absolutely nothing since that meeting. There was a public ward committee meeting last week, which residents questioned Dave Atkinson and Councillor Dagorn, but there's been no feedback from those officers about this problem to us as ward councillors since your meeting. Now, in response to what the corporate directors said regarding the university and planning conditions and such like, I think for a bit of context, you do need to consider that at the recent local plan inquiry, one of those planning conditions, which was very, very important, was just swept aside. And that was the condition limiting Heslington East development to 23% of the footprint of that site. 77% was supposed to remain as open parkland. Now, between them, the university and the council have agreed that the estate needs to be worked harder, there'll be more development taking place, and obviously there'll be more parking need, and likely more parking, displaced parking and pressures on surrounding communities. So it's important to get all this matter right now. York University, if I heard it right, and I won't say that I did, they're saying there's a 20% of spaces on their on-campus car parks are empty. It would be churlish of me not to say that there's been an improvement this autumn since the students and staff have returned. So obviously what initiatives have taken place have been fairly effective. The parking has returned to Tranby Avenue, but certainly not on the scale that it was when it became a major issue last year. So I think a combination of going forward with these joint campaigns and also encouraging students to park on these spaces on the university car parks, we might be somewhere near solving the problem. I don't know whether you've taken enough from that to want to ask any questions, but I'm quite happy to answer any.
Thanks, Councillor Waters. I will just invite members of the committee if they have any questions. I'm not seeing anybody with their hands. Oh, Councillor Kilbane.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for that, Mark. Mark, can I just clarify? You saying that the situation's improving, and if it carries on, then everything's okay?
It has improved significantly. In terms of the displaced parking, I haven't seen as much on Hull Road from Archie's School. So whether they've had words with the sixth formers or whether they've increased parking provision, which I remember Councillor Rowley saying they were looking at doing. He's a governor there. Certainly on Tranby Avenue and Cavendish Grove, there's probably, this morning when I went out, 4 or 5 cars that's causing an issue, but it's not 20 cars. So, yeah, it would be churlish of me not to say that it has improved. But there shouldn't be any of these cars needing to park there. They should all be accommodated on campus. And it's the situation going forward, especially with the parking provision on campus. It's all right, everybody's saying we've got sustainable travel plans, but it's not sustainable to displace problem parking, amongst other issues, to surrounding neighbourhoods.
Thanks, Councillor Waters. That's positive to hear that there's been improvement. The one question I wanted to ask you, just to get a bit of clarity about where, from your perspective, the parking is coming from. Is your sense that this is people that are travelling in on a daily basis and parking near to the university, or is it people who are perhaps at the university who have a car and are there during term time, but are not necessarily using their car to get to the university, but are creating additional parking?
Well, one thing that came up at the public meeting last week, and one thing that's been mentioned before, is students living in HMOs on Badger Hill, where they've only got one parking pass, or the landlord's only allowing them one parking pass per HMO, and some of them are just dumping cars over the road in Osberwick for weeks and in some cases months on end. The executive member was asked to look at how these Res Park passes are allocated. But yeah, it's usually on a daily or weekly basis. Again, I think I sent the photos earlier this summer when university was in recess. Well, there was no displaced parking whatsoever. Now you see quite a bit in the week, but it's usually gone by a weekend. But there's just this hardcore of cars that are left in the streets for weeks on end. I think when I came to you, it was April, I was saying there was probably a hardcore of 30 cars causing this chaos. We're probably down now to single figures on a daily basis. So like I say, things are improving. It just needs to be taken that step further.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Waters. I'm just looking around in case anybody has any further questions. I'm not seeing any. In which case, I'll thank you for your time today, Councillor Waters, and obviously you'll be able to watch the remainder of the meeting on the webcast.
Right. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So if I move us on, then just to invite committee members, if there's any questions that you have of the university or the officers based on the report. Councillor Fenton.
Thanks, Chair. So this is on page 4, paragraph 20. It's a summary of the findings of parking surveys undertaken by the university. And one of the findings was that most of the cars that were parked in the Tranby Avenue area related to students who were living in that area rather than parking up and then going to university. I just wonder how what approach you took that allowed you to differentiate between the different types of parking between either residents or commuters to university.
There's some timescales associated with the survey, depending on what time people are parked, as to whether it's attributed to the university or not, or people that are in residence. So that's detailed in the full surveys. I won't pretend to reel those times off now, but that's how they're determined.
So just to build on that, when you're doing the survey, is it purely an observation? It's a sort of a drive around and count cars, or is there any kind of survey or dialogue with the occupants of the cars or residents in the area?
That's dependent on the type of surveys. So the surveys that were done in March of this year, they're just a count. Depending on what we find on those, we have to repeat the surveys, and those repeat surveys can have interviews associated with them as well, but we don't tend to get great feedback from the interviews. People don't like being asked why they're parking in a particular location, so we don't get a lot of rich information from that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fisher.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. Could I just ask, do you have a registration scheme for students who are attending the university who bring cars to York or not? Because I know some universities do that, so they can keep a track of exactly which cars are student cars and which are not.
We have a student permit scheme, so any student that lives outside of the outer ring road of York can apply in for a permit. So those are the only cars that we'd register that would be eligible to park on the university. There's some exemptions to that for students that are on courses that require placement, so like medical degrees and those types of things, they would get a permit as well. But those are the only cars that we'd actively track.
Thank you.
And Councillor Orrell.
Paragraph 34 talks about a travel plan from 2020 to 25. Is there a reason why that's not been completed by now, and what is happening when that hasn't been done?
There was a paused for COVID on the initial travel plan. We've just submitted a draft to the council for review. So that'll be a travel plan from 2022 to 2025. We've shortened that period to allow for post-COVID travel habits to settle down, and then we can review again in 2025.
Is it either Ian or James wanted to just come in on
I'll come in first. I think just to confirm that this report was written for a previous date in the diary. So that bit of the report is technically out of date. It has arrived and we are working through that, and we will go back to university and discuss that. And just to address the comment made by Councillor Waters about engagement, in the front of the report it actually says at para 2, Roman numeral 2, that once we've got to that point, it's at that point we'd engage with the ward councillors. But as you've heard, Dave has already been out talking to ward councillors and residents as well.
Thanks, and the same point from yourself, Ian. Yeah, thank you. And just to clarify, from the university perspective then, so you would be developing a travel plan that would cover the remainder of that 5-year period up to 2025, and then there would be a new travel plan post 2025 onwards, and would that be another 5-year plan, or how does that part of it work?
I anticipate it'd be another 5-year plan, because that would take us up to a point where we're matching the council's net zero ambitions for the university. So we'd be setting out what we mean in terms of sustainable travel for that period associated with the travel plan.
Okay, and I'll bring Councillor Kilbane in 1 second. Neil, did you want to just add something?
Yeah, just in terms of the question around the local planning effect, the increased densities, they'll be clearly subject to additional planning applications. But as is noted in the report, there is quite an amount of already consented headroom within the existing planning permission. So in terms of the future provision, it's there. But I think the point that Richard has just made, I think, is really important and an interesting one for the committee to consider in terms of the impact of transport on climate change. And as we head to 2030, the measures as the authority, as a council regulating the highway, you choose as members over the next 6-7 years to implement policies, that putting that in lockstep with the university is going to be a key part of that coming together as a city to achieve climate change net zero. So again, it's about using the tools that you have as a council alongside the tools that the university can apply to its students and employees. And then just one final point in terms of the students, and I'm just thoroughly aware of the extent that people, in particular students, might watch this. Students are residents of the city. If they have cars, they're allowed to park them on the road. It's their right to do so as taxpayers in terms of the vehicles on the road. So it's just, again, that differentiation and that consistent treatment of all road users. Your policies apply blind relative to the drivers.
Thanks, Neil. I think that last point is clearly very important, and I think you slightly read my mind in the question I was just going to put, but just for total clarity, because the report says that there's 1,000 extra parking spaces that haven't yet been used that were agreed within the outline application. And I wasn't aware of this change within the local plan about a possible increase in density on the Heslington East site. Did that also include any change to that parking provision, or is that 1,000 capacity still the same, irrespective of an increase in density?
The capacity will remain the same, but as Neil said, any increase of density that requires planning consent, that will all go into the mix as part of the planning process. So we're not planning to deliver out any more parking spaces at the moment, not least because we've got that 20% float. And I think as we go further into hybrid working as a university, we'll need to consider both the intensification of use and the need for more parking together as an holistic item. But if I could just add that because of the travel plan and it's being a sustainable travel plan, we would very much hope that it doesn't follow that increased development means more car parking. we are increasingly trying to get people out of cars, onto bicycles, by foot, onto public transport.
That's certainly something that will be welcomed around the table, I think. If I could just come to either Sandra or Gareth, just for a point of clarity around, again, this is more just for sort of reassurance for people rather than anything else. The outline application is or the outline consent is where the parking figure came from, isn't it? Is that correct? So if there were subsequent applications to develop out the Heslington East site, they would still be constrained by that maximum amount of parking as was set out in the outline.
Yes, that's correct. If they came in as reserve matters, then they're controlled by excuse me, by the outline, which has those parking maxima within them. If they came in as full applications, which they could do, then obviously the outline would still be a material consideration and could take account of that when granting or determining planning applications.
But that would still give the planning authority the control over whether or not to agree to, I mean, notwithstanding what you've already said about not wanting to increase the parking, but that would leave the planning authority as the arbiter in terms of whether or not to increase parking over and above what was previously agreed in the outline.
Yeah, that's correct. So what we couldn't do as the planning authority is attempt through reserve matters to reduce the number of parking spaces that have already been allowed for in the outline. But otherwise, yes, it's a decision of the planning authority.
Okay, thank you. Oh, sorry, Ian, if you want to add something to that.
Yeah, just to add that even if the parking is amended to go up to those headroom levels that are allowed, there is another condition that has to be satisfied to enable that to take place. One of which is the controlling amount of traffic on 3 junctions.
So just to clarify that for the committee, my understanding is that there's a condition around how much vehicle traffic going to and from the university passes through certain junctions, and there's obligations on the university to upgrade those junctions if they meet thresholds of over a certain number of vehicles, presumably per hour, is it, or is it per day? Or
I believe it's peak hour traffic levels.
Thank you. Councillor Gilbane, I think you had a question a little while ago.
Just, fortunately, Chair, most of my questions have been asked because I would have felt quite hypocritical berating another organisation for not having an up-to-date transport plan. And it's good to hear that you will be consulting with the ward councillors as you develop that plan. So I guess the point that I would like to make is in our recommendations, Chair. So we have under point 3.3, considering recommendations for future travel plan, and just to encapsulate all that's been talked about in the last sort of 10 minutes. I would like to put that we recommend that the future travel plan reduces the number of car journeys to and from the university, which indeed is the current trend, I believe, based on what's been said in this plan. So building on the good work that's already been done, we would recommend that any future travel plan reduces the number of car journeys to and from the university. I think would be a good thing for this committee to do.
Okay, that's noted. We'll come to recommendations at the end of the meeting, but I'll make a note of that. And I don't know if the university has any comment that they would want to add to that in terms of if we were to make that sort of a recommendation request. Obviously, we can't mandate you, but
we would very much welcome that. And my learned colleague has just passed me a statistic which is slightly eye-watering. So from the latest counts across our car parks, there are 2,300 fewer journeys per day coming on and off campus, which is a brilliant result. And that's, I think, a mixture of hybrid working, the investment we're making in the technology, and adherence to the travel plan, which is great.
no, that is certainly welcome. Councillor Kilbane, I think you.
Thanks, Chair. That's great. That's great to hear. And just in terms of the council's commitment on paragraph 5, page 2, we are looking to build quality alternatives to private car use with cycling and pedestrian networks, some of which have been delivered. Which ones have we still to deliver up at the university area?
I think we probably need to go back and check with other officers that aren't in the room, as you understand, Sir Councillor Kilbane.
I think in which case, if you could do that and then circulate that to committee, that would certainly be helpful. I've got a question I'm holding back, but I'm going to go to members first. So Councillor Fenton, if you're indicating, and Councillor Orwell, were you indicating as well?
Just on paragraph 21, where it states the next step is for the university to engage with the council to determine what can and should be done. This is in relation to the findings of the survey about on-street parking. Would those discussions happen in the context of the discussion on the travel plan, or would it be a sort of separate sort of freestanding conversation about the outcomes of the survey and what action, if any, could be done? It sounds, yeah, it's a nice thing to say, oh well, we'll talk about what can and should be done, but how will that be kind of structured? And again, I'm sure if the ward councillors were here, they would want to be involved in those discussions about what could and should be done, recognising their dislike for both residents' parking schemes and double yellow lines.
So I think recognising that we live in a free society and that there are limited controls that the university can place upon their students and their employees, I think the behavioural change and the behaviour campaign that the students and the university employees have responded to this term demonstrates the power of persuasion. Clearly, ultimately, it will be a matter for the councils, the highways authorities, with the regulatory powers to impose certain conditions on road users, to make choices as to how you manage the streets of York in terms of their use for people parking and effectively commuting to work. I mean, this is another workplace. I mean, clearly there's an awful lot of res park in the city associated with commuting into the city centre, and this is just a different workplace that is having commuters go to it. And there are those tools in the toolbox that we've talked about so far in respect of, and they've been widely used and have been proactively used by the council, but there are other mechanisms in play around the country at the moment. So, for example, Bradford's introduced its clean air zone and congestion charging. There are opportunities for councils to introduce charges for work-placed car parking. So I think it's Nottingham Council that levies a tax effectively on employers that have car parking provision within centres in the city. And clearly these are choices for members on behalf of the residents of York as to how to control traffic levels within the city and where they park. So future choices, and I think the discussion is clearly based around consent and behavioural change where we can, but ultimately it is the council that will have the choices in terms of the direction.
Thank you. Councillor de Goan, if you want
So
to add something, and just to introduce you as the executive member for transport. Sorry, we didn't do that.
Yes, sorry, just to add to that, the meeting that was referred to that Dave Atkinson and myself attended last week, there was quite a wide-ranging discussion with residents about the issues that they've experienced on Tranby Avenue and Cavendish, I think it was. And there were some points made, like in addition to the residents parking and double yellow lines, other approaches that could be considered, such as a point maybe only an hour a day, which would preclude commuter parking but allow maximum flexibility for residents if they chose to go down that road. But that would be something that we would consult with the ward councillors on if that seemed to be a solution to their particular problem. In the circumstances, I'm aware that that's already been applied on Bishop Road alongside the former Terry's factory, and it seems to be there's flexibility built in there for short stay parking, but precludes commuter parking on that stretch of road.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's something we discussed at the last call-in as well, wasn't it? The opportunity to potentially look at disrupting long-term or longer-term parking rather than precluding resident parking, as it were. Councillor Orrell, you had your hand up if you wanted to come in.
Yeah, thank you. Just following on from what Councillor Fenton said, the report says that ward councillors don't want residents parking, and Councillor Fenton said yellow lines as well. Is that all the ward councillors, and is there a rationale for that?
So the question was, all ward councillors don't want double yellow lines. Sorry, I think so. Yeah. I think there was a mix of views when it went through. The Tranby Avenue measures went through originally. There was obviously consultation, but I think there were mixed views around where and the extent of the double yellow lines. And I think where it fell in the decision session and then was backed up by the call-in session was where the double yellows would be implemented where they were clearly causing an obstruction. So it was more about enforcing on corners and bends than it was about prohibiting people from parking. So in the first instance, the implementation of the double yellows in that particular area. To comment across the city, we quite often get mixed views on measures on any particular street. We've got live issues within your ward around things like other things, which I'll not mention because that may well be something the chair doesn't want us to get into at this meeting. So there are different views from different ward councillors around what appropriate measures would be. And then from the Highway Authority's perspective, we've got to take a measured response and bring the recommendations back to the Exec Member for Transport in terms of what we do and what we move forward with. I think there will be further work in this area. There's no question about that. The public meeting that Councillor Gorn and I attended last week, we did commit to doing more patrols in those areas, which I've instructed officers to do. And to pick up on a previous point of Councillor Fenton's, I think about, it was to the university about the mix of how they assess, how the university assess the mix of people parking in a particular area. We also pick anecdotal evidence up from parkers and residents as well when we do our own work. And again, in this particular area, there was a mix of longer term parkers, people who were clearly going to the university, and residents who had visitors. And I think there was a clear sort of representation at the meeting that residents do want that space for visitors to be able to come. And then I think there's the broader thing about the expansion of resident parking and the inevitable sort of expansion into other areas and the displacement that causes. So in I was going to say in brief, but not a particularly brief way, there is a mix of views, and then we use an evidence-based approach to put the appropriate measures in place, whether that's double yellow lines or restrictions. And I think that the item Councillor de Gaulle picked up on about potentially differential or smaller conditions on the road is probably a good approach when we're looking at going into other areas and reviewing existing areas.
Just to be really clear about that question there, Councillor Orrell, at the last two call-ins, Councillor Rowley and Councillor Waters have both, as the ward councillors for Oswaldwick and Derwent, have both been very categorical that they didn't want to see res park introduced. I think Councillor Rowley was more amenable to the idea of double yellows or possibly single yellows if it was a safety concern or if it was a way of managing it. I think Councillor Waters was much more of the view that there were other mechanisms he felt should be employed first before there was any kind of restrictions placed on the roads. And I think that's probably all at a counterpoint to the Hull Road councillors, all three of whom I believe have been very supportive of the res park zone that came in there, which, as I understand it, has been very effective in terms of delivering for the residents. There is, of course, a question about perhaps what happens post 2024 with that res park zone and anything else, but that's perhaps not for us to discuss today, and something that we may return to at a future date. Councillor Looker, I think you had your hand up.
Yes, I mean, I was really going to pick up that point, that in a sense we have what you might call a controlled zone where in Badger Hill and Tranby Avenue are both obviously areas for focused parking if you want to get to the university, and particularly if you don't want to pay. I mean, the whole problem with car parks is, as we know to our cost, is that people, if they can find a free car parking place, will go and find it. And that's in a sense why residence parking came into force, because everybody wants free car parking, don't you? You all want free car parking. It's your inalienable right. But can I just say, looking at the, because Badger Hill has now had Res Park for quite a while, comparing the two places, did Res Park resolve the problems that the area in Oswaldwick is now suffering from? Did it work? Has it worked? Is it effective? And do the residents, you put up with it in the end, acknowledge that it has worked and has sorted out a problem, which is essentially a commuting to work problem? It's just that students are going to work rather than businessmen going to work in Nestle or something. But did it solve the problem?
I mean, within the Badger Hill area, particularly, I think as Councillor Crawshaw represented, I think ward councillors feel that it's been a successful scheme. The ward councillors within the Oswaldwick area have been concerned about the displacement effects of resident parking on that particular area. We don't have an evidence base at the moment that says residents are, I haven't got a sentiment to say whether residents are happy or not, or accepting or not. I think we've seen an improvement. The sentiment at the meeting last week, I think there are still some issues, but I think they're improving is the message.
Richard, did you want to add something?
I have seen some surveys not undertaken by the university that suggest that about 2/3 of residents in that Badger Hill area are satisfied with the scheme.
And James?
Just to follow up on what Dave said, I think wherever we introduce any form of restriction on the highway, there is a displacement consequence. And in essence, that's what a little bit of this is about. You implement restrictions in one area, and an element of the problem, not the whole problem, will find a different solution. To a certain extent, we've seen that as res park in its wider sense has sort of radiated out from the city centre as that parking pressure sort of radiates out.
Neil, and then Ian.
I think Councillor Lucas' reference to inalienable right for free car parking is a very interesting one, because again, in terms of res park areas, one of the considerations I think the council's going to come to more and more consideration of is those that have free parking by the provision within their own boundaries, and those that don't. So where it is a choice for somebody who needs a car to go to work, having free car parking on a drive, and those that do not. And that is clearly, it sort of influences the way a community responds to res park. And there's also a consideration, I think will become more of a consideration for members as to how we look at that on a equitable basis across the city going forward. And I think it's a future challenge that the authority is going to have to consider, particularly when you start to look at, and it was the climate change scrutiny, I think about 18 months, 2 years ago now, where you look at the desirability of new properties. The builder's view is, and it still is the case, that those properties that have that inalienable free car parking are the ones that are popular and sell, and they're the ones that they're building, and you can see that down at Germany Beck.
Ian, did you want to add something?
I think I was just adding in terms of whether the parking restrictions have been successful. in terms of whether they set out what was the objective of introducing them, they have, because the parking levels in the areas where they've been introduced in the last year or two, the parking levels have gone down and I believe are below the threshold levels. So they've met what the objective was.
And Councillor de Gaulle, I think you had a comment as
Yeah,
well.
just to endorse that, certainly to my knowledge, the whole road board councillors were quite rightly representing the concerns of their residents and followed through the policy which we have in place across the city about a poll in effect of households in that area. They met the criteria and therefore they got the measures in place, and certainly in my experience, wherever we've introduced residents parking scheme, I've got some in mind, but you've probably got, quite a few of us have got the areas within our wards. The evidence is that it does resolve the issue of a commuter parking, and certainly we've got areas where grass verges are all completely chewed up, and now they've completely recovered because there's no longer that level of parking pressure there was previously. It's clear evidence that it's worked in terms of the objective of allowing residents to have first priority parking in their own streets.
Yeah, I think we probably all of us in certainly city centre wards recognise that creep that happens, and I think where we can do bigger zones, it probably is the way forward actually in terms of a more rational, larger area in one go to kind of move away from that inevitable street by street creep that we see. Councillor Kilbane, I think you had a question.
Yeah, thanks. I've seen that we were getting all philosophical about it, weren't we? So I thought I'd chuck in my bit, which is we are seeing a net increase of nearly 500,000 cars on the roads in the UK every year on year, and they've all got to go somewhere. The road space doesn't increase at the same level, and I don't think most of us would want it to increase, so they end up parking in suburban areas and people get annoyed about it and introduce residents parking zones, or they end up parking on grass verges, or we end up parking on pavements because all these cars have to go somewhere. And until we get a transport plan in place that actually reduces the number of cars on the roads within the local authority area, we're just going to be carrying on this conversation forever.
I think that's a fair point, well made, and brings me neatly back to the question which I wanted to ask the university, which was around your travel plan, because I think the conversation, we've tended to be thinking about it, I think, in terms of people travelling to the university and back to wherever they've come from and by what mode they're travelling there. But one of the questions that I'd asked Councillor Waters and was trying to sort of understand was the extent to which the parking issues that they're experiencing in their ward are from people coming in, commuting, and then walking to the university, or whether it's an increased number of residents at particular times of the year who have all travelled to York with their car and then perhaps leave it parked. And I just wondered whether the travel plan, as you draw it up, includes anything about how students actually arrive in York. So even if they don't use their car on a daily basis, are you doing anything to try and encourage them to travel in a way that doesn't require them to come in a car and leave the car parked on the outside the house for the next 3 months, and sort of anything that you can do to promote York as a city that you don't actually need a car to travel around? And does your travel plan speak to that at all, or is that something that you'd be open to considering including?
So one of York's overarching marketing strands is that it is a compact city, and we do encourage students to not come with cars. We make that a central feature, that it's a commutable city. It's one where you can walk in and out of the city centre. I'm going to hand over to Richard, so that's the overarching marketing, to talk specifically about the travel plan.
Now, the essence of our travel plan really is to promote active transport and reduce the number of cars. So there's various measures that we have in place. One is restricting permits, so you just don't get a place to park. So there's this little point bringing a car, and then it's the promotion of public transport, walking, cycling, all the bits that you'd expect to be in a travel plan that connects to what the city are trying to do. So all those aspects are spoken to within the plan that's with the council at the moment.
But just to be clear on that point, though, is that around travelling, say, from your student residence or your HMO in Oswaldwick or wherever to the university, or do you include anything around? I mean, you mentioned about the overarching that the city is compact and you generally don't need a car, but within the travel plan itself, are you doing anything to actively encourage the first years when they first come here to say don't bother bringing a car so you don't get used to it? That sort of conversation.
Those messages are put out in the promotional material that the university use. So we, as part of the plan, we try to actively discourage people bringing cars.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. I think we're possibly reaching a bit of a natural conclusion there. I'm not seeing further hands going up in terms of questions. The one other thing that I just had at the back of my mind, and I'm not going to put you on the spot to ask you to give me a sort of a direct answer about it now, but I just wondered whether there is any conversational dialogue ongoing about what happens beyond 2024 with the support that the university is currently giving to the res park zones. I'm not going to ask you to commit to anything, but is there a dialogue ongoing between the council and the university, or is it just a very clear understanding that the 106 agreement is what it was and we're not looking at any further conversation around that?
I think all I would say at this point, Chair, is that we're always open to dialogue. It may be that there are other ways of investing on behalf of the city that would work better to provide a holistic solution, but we're always open to dialogue.
And Councillor de Gon.
If I could respond on that, in the conversations that I had regarding the Badger Hill extension, which is obviously at the root of this issue, it was made clear that the arrangement was until 2024 to the residents in that area, and from memory there was certainly an understanding by the residents of Badger Hill that there would be effectively a fresh mandate coming towards the end of that period for residents to then decide whether they still want residents parking, given that the financial commitment for them would be different from what it is at the moment. So I would very much support the idea of that engagement and a sort of joint approach leading up to that point in time, so that residents in the university and the council work together on trying to ensure that the facility that's in place now has continuing support from the residents, but there will be that dialogue with residents to decide whether or not it's still right for them and the conditions and the financial arrangements that are in place at the time when we reach that.
Neil, did you want to add something?
Yeah, just absolutely ongoing dialogue with the university about, I think just for clarity, and I'm sure Sandra will comment if I misstep, is that to the extent that there's an obligation for 15 years, that was the reasonable assessment that it was 15 years. Whilst there would be clearly, and I think as Councillor de Gon's intimated, a discussion with the university, primarily there'll be a decision for the executive member of transport at the time as to what regulation applies in what areas of the city. And clearly you can take the views of the residents of any part of the city into account, again, on that journey of controlling vehicles across the city. Again, it's just been clear to residents they're managing expectations of the likelihood of a reversal of a resident parking arrangement with any part of the city as you go towards net zero. So I think it's just really been forthright about whose decision it is and the likelihood of it happening.
Okay, thanks all. That's certainly been helpful. So I think from the committee's point of view, What I'll do, I'll just thank you all for your attendance and coming. You're very welcome just to sort of hang on for 5 minutes. I don't think we'll be very long, but it's just whether we as a committee want to just consider if there are any specific recommendations that we want to make. So on page 1.3, paragraph 3 gives some invited recommendations, and so obviously we've noted the background and policy context. I think we've noted that there's engagement work ongoing between the council, university, and we've noted, I think, the ward councillors' desire to be further engaged, at appropriate points along the way. And I would just include that it's all of the ward councillors from the adjacent wards. There's obviously been a particular focus on Oswaldwick of late, but the ongoing discussion needs to include everybody. And then the consideration of any recommendations for the future travel plan. Now, I did note at the start of the meeting that we can't mandate anybody as a committee, but we can certainly make a request or a recommendation. And I think that the suggestion was made by Councillor Kilbane that we request that the university, when you're drawing up your travel plan and to recommend to the council when we're agreeing it with them, that the focus is on a continued reduction in car travel rather than any sort of maintaining of a status quo. So I think if committee members are happy to endorse that, if we could just have a show of hands. Did you want to make a comment, Councillor Fenton, just before?
Yeah, so I think that's not an unreasonable request, particularly in light of the success that we've heard about in terms of the reduction in journeys, so that hopefully would be well received.
So as I say, if members are happy just to show hands of recommendation, yeah, that's great. And then the other thought that I'd had, and again, I don't know whether this is something that we could build into a travel plan or how it might best sit, but Councillor Kilbane and I, in our ward, we have the racecourse, and the racecourse gives us all sorts of benefits, but some headaches. And one of the things that's been really constructive, actually, is a really good ongoing working relationship with the university. I'm jumping ahead of myself, with the racecourse, whereby we are meeting regularly with them, and we're holding regular meetings with the community and the racecourse. And I just wondered whether the university might be in a position to commit to working with the ward councillors on an ongoing basis, so that actually you're preempting problems. So if as Councillor Waters has said, things have been better this year, which is really positive, actually meeting again at a point further down through the year or at the start of the next academic year, just to kind of touch base and know that things are still working in the way that they should do, would seem to me to be a sensible thing to be doing, if that's something you could commit to.
Thank you. We do have our good neighbours forums, and what I think what I'm hearing is that we maybe don't advertise them well enough. So I will try to make sure that we have all relevant ward members re-invited, if you like, to make sure that you get those periodic invitations.
Yeah, I think that would.
So the forum exists. I think we just need to advertise it more widely.
Yeah, I think that would certainly be welcome, and certainly worth making sure post 2023 that if there's any change in individual councillors, that the ward councillors post 2023 are given a sort of a explicit formal invite. I think that would certainly be sensible. So unless anybody had, Councillor Kilbane.
I don't want to hog all the recommendations. If anybody else has got any thoughts they wanted to. No, okay, me. I heard you loud and clear when you said that there may be more holistic ways of investing in alternative transport. So I would like to suggest that when you're looking at your sustainable transport routes, you're walking and cycling routes, that you do so in consultation with the City of York, because we have some mysterious high quality alternatives that are going to be delivered in the area. So it'd be good to make sure that they are all joined up together, because what happens in York is we have small sections of active travel routes that then just disappear into nothing. So what we really need is high quality routes that will get you from the sports centre on Campus East all the way into the city centre, preferably off-road on a protected cycle lane, and we can only do that if we work together. So I'd like to see that happen.
So I think in terms of a recommendation, if we were to go down that route, the recommendation would then actually be to the executive member to work closely with the university and other stakeholders to ensure that any active travel routes are joined up and holistic. That'll be the right wording. So state of the art sustainable transport. Dave, did you want to comment?
Yeah, just so everybody's aware that we're working through the local cycling and walking infrastructure plan at the moment. So happy to invite the university to those discussions. That's the A, where we work out that network, and B, we use that as then a bidding document to central government.
I think that sounds sensible. Richard, did you want to comment?
We've already been to the first
Yeah, I
meeting.
couldn't remember whether you'd directly been invited personally, so I didn't want to assume.
Yeah. I think we're all pushing at the same thing, aren't we? So as I say, I think if members are happy that we just make that as a formal recommendation of this committee as well, then it just gives that little bit of weight perhaps to any conversations that are ongoing. So again, if I can just see by show of hands that we're happy to do that. Okay, that's great. So unless anybody else had anything else that they wanted to jump in on, I will bring us to an end of that agenda item. And I would just like to thank Richard and Harvey for your attendance today, and for the officers who've attended, and Councillor de Gorn as exec member. Thank you all for coming. For the committee, we have just one more agenda item, I believe. Agenda item 4, am I right? I'm looking for it, which usually is there, but it's not in my papers, but that's urgent business. And we don't have any urgent business. So in which case, I'll thank you all for your attendance today and draw the meeting to a close. Thank you.